All right. Hello, everyone. So this is the tech panel. We had to swap things because of availability and everything. But yeah, I decided to submit another tech panel to this year's NASA. It was fairly well received last year. There was a lot of chat interaction, so I do hope that you guys do have questions this year again as well while I'm explaining anything. So if anything doesn't ever make sense, I do have my phone here so I can see what's going on. And when I did a tech panel at GDQ, that was also fairly well received. I think it's like the third or fourth watch panel from AGDQ 2019. So yeah, we're going to be doing this again. Those crazy guys, you can start the timer in three, two, one, go. We're going to speedrun talking here for whatever reason, but realistically, I can talk very, very fast, but I really don't want to. So we're just going to take the casual strats here. But I do really hope that everyone has noticed some of the changes that we've gone along with this year. There's up on the screen instead of a second webcam, I decided to put the picture that I put on the NASA Twitter for this year, and that's how our audio setup looks like this year. So I want to point out a few things. The long piece of equipment on the bottom, the first thing that you see, the one with the vertical LEDs, that's the compressor that we've rented this year. And what that helps with is that even if I'm talking kind of quieter, now I'm talking very loudly, it's going to compress the audio so it doesn't spike up a lot and down as much. It still does, like you can tell when I talk louder or quieter, but it's a lot less jarring. It makes the quieter parts louder and the louder parts quieter to help kind of level things out. The yes, thank you. Yes, move that there. There. I also have one with Nando. There we go. Perfect. I'm gonna keep these things. These pillows are great. I got them last year. I do enjoy them. They actually stay in my living room as NASA pillows. But in any case, so that's what that first piece of equipment does. The piece of equipment behind it, the one with all the little gray knobs, that's actually a graphics equalizer. So a lot of people who maybe do audio normally for work probably know what that's for, but for the rest of you, you're probably wondering, well, why do you need a graphics equalizer? You're like not playing music or anything. You don't need to EQ. The point of that in professional audio is it comes along with the change this year. Last year we had feedback that it was great that there was speakers that you could hear the game and everything, but there was feedback that you couldn't actually hear the person talking, which when people can project their voice, there's no problem. But then when you have more quieter types, it's very hard to hear what's going on. And there were actually runs last year where the stream had a much more clear voice compared to everyone in the room for listening to the runner. So for this year, we decided to change that up. The voice is actually being outputted on the speakers as well, and obviously that can lead into all sorts of feedback issues. What is feedback? If you don't know, feedback is when the audio coming from the microphone out of the speaker is loud enough that the microphone is catching it, and it causes a loop of it hearing itself over and over and over again, and that causes that high-pitched whine. It could even be a low-pitched whine. So what the graphics equalizer does, let me just pull it up on my phone here very quickly. You can see that my phone has a real-time attack. I'm gonna pull a Joe Rogan, Young Those Crazy Guys. Can you zoom in on this here? Young Jamie, can get in on this here. Perfect. Let me get that in the camera. So that's a real-time analyzer. This Android app is called RTA Pro. As you can see, depending on my voice, it moves, and you can tell what frequency everything's on. You can zoom back out now. We can come back to my face. Thank you, young Jamie. Thank you. So basically, what that allows me to do is I can make the microphones get loud enough that they feedback and then cut down the frequency at which they're feedbacking, which means that it can get to that loud point but not cause the feedback. And that allows you to push the microphones louder because of the fact that they won't be feedbacking as quickly. And when you have a situation where there's multiple microphones and everything like that, obviously feedback is a major concern. So being able to get that extra room that didn't exist before to mix is very useful. The We're not going to go to the mixer on top of it, but we're going to actually jump to the mixer beside it. So that big mixer right there is what we're mixing all the audio on for this year. It's a Yamaha MG24. It's different from the mixer we had last year, being an Allen and Heath Z24. It's a much older mixer. It doesn't have any digital luxuries like having a USB output or anything like that. But it does have more luxuries in the sense that it has multiple aux outputs compared to the board we used last year having four. This one has six, which means that I can do more multi-track outputs or more headset mixes if need be. And it also has something called submixes. So what a submix is, it's literally a mix before your main mix. And with that, it allows me to mix all the microphones in a submix, and then that submix gets output into the compressor and then back in. So instead of auxing everything, like everything jammed into one pipe, it's just its own little mix that gets treated differently, and it allows for everything to work the way it does. And then with the main mix is coming out of that big board into the little board. My personal Allen and Heath ZI-10. It has a 4 input, 4 output USB interface, which means that the left and right channels of the main mix on that big board are coming to your ears on the stream. There is a separate channel that grabs all the audio from an aux out that is before the compressor, and that's more of a redundancy thing. That's in case the compressor ever screws up the audio where it just sounds really bad. There's that backup of audio before the compressor, and there's also a game-only audio track. So I think it's a better version of what I tried to do last year. So that way, there's three separate tracks. There's the main mix, there's a game-only mix, and there is a commentary-only mix. And if anything ever goes wrong in the VOD, now you can fix it up with the backup audio tracks. So that's pretty much how our audio setup works. There's also, you can't see it on the picture, but there's also a headphone distribution amplifier. That's not new. We've had that last year, and that just allows all our headsets to have mixes here. Now, another new piece of equipment is actually the headset microphone that I'm currently wearing. The reason I'm able to do this is because I have a wired lav pack by Shure, which uses the Shure lav pack connector here. It's a T4AF or TA4F, something along those lines. And basically, I thought it would be easier. This model is a Shure model, so it sounds a lot nicer, but I also bought a cheapo Pile Pro headset just to try it out as well. And the reason I wanted to try this out was if you're on the couch, you don't necessarily need the whole headphone headset sports broadcaster thing going on there. Something like this would be perfectly fine. I wish I had more of these, and I wish I kind of would be able to try this out a lot more. But sometimes when it's kind of a balance, right? If you have one commentator on the couch, um, it would maybe work fine. But there's also the fact that there's those lectern microphones as well that we just like to stick on the tables because they can grab multiple people. So we might try to use these out more. Personally, I like this a lot right now. It's very easy. It's very lightweight. If I ever needed headphones in the future as well, instead of buying the Audio-Technica BPHS1, which every runner has been using, or the Sennheiser HMD 280 Pros, which we'll be using during the next run, the Super Metroid A Link to the Past randomizer, so both runners have headsets. You can pick up something like this. And this microphone is obviously going to sound a lot better than something on a sports broadcaster. Yes, something like those headsets that I mentioned will be cutting out a lot more audio because they're meant for high noise environments. So a microphone like this is more designed for something like theater or anything along those lines. But the luxury of being able to use your own headphones, I think, will be very useful. Because potentially, what if you have a special set of headphones that you want to wear for whatever reason, or you have just better sounding headphones that you want to use? You can get a little creative in that front while still having very good audio. So we'll probably start looking into solutions like this since I do have two of these kits. So we'll be wary of that. Let me just check how chat's doing. Make sure I've answered any questions. Those Audio Technica or Sennheisers? We have both, like I mentioned. We have both Audio Technica and Sennheiser headphones. So that's really all there is on the audio side of things. On the video side, there hasn't been really much changes as well, beyond the fact that we do have a lot more capture inputs this year. Between me and Lurk, we both own a Magewell Quad HDMI capture card. So there's 4 HDMI inputs on this Magewell card. What's nice about the Magewell card is that they actually do their own kind of scaling and deinterlacing and everything built in onto the card, which is very nice. So in theory, you could just set the Magewell in OBS to be a custom 1920 by 1080, and then no matter what you feed into it, it will just scale it to fit that 1920 by 1080. If for ease of use, that's very useful. Because then you don't care if it's an older console, a newer console, whatever laptop, it just goes in and your layout will never change on the video side. And the built-in deinterlacing means you don't have to deal with OBS deinterlacing or anything like that. So between those two, we have 8 HDMI inputs, which we've been using for the 3 cameras that we have. So the Panasonic is an upgrade this year. This is the Panasonic TM900 camcorder. It's a prosumer camcorder that's a couple years old, but it does a full 1080p 60. It has a clean HDMI output. It has optical zoom and digital zoom. It has a bigger, because when you're looking at 1080p, it's mostly referred to as 2K because you can fit 1080p with roughly within 2 megapixels. This camera, I believe, is 8 or 12 megapixels, so beyond the optical zoom built into it with actual glass and lensing, it can do a digital zoom where it just crops in on its own sensor, like most DSLRs do nowadays. When you pick them up to do 4K, they'll just crop in on the sensor, and that allows them to do 4K video even though they're like 24 megapixels. So it's very useful in that fact. This is actually also the camera that we ran Speed Kino off of. That was its big debut to test in a 24/7 live environment, and it passed, and now it's being tested again in a non-TV capturing environment. The Xiaomi camera is back again this year, the Chinese action cam, and then we have a GoPro that's actually strapped to the projector screens, so that way it gets that overhead view of the event. So beyond that, we have the 3 cameras. We have the console capture, the runner PC capture. That's already 6 HDMI inputs there. If we had more races where we needed to set up a second runner PC or anything like that, clearly there's more available inputs there. It does mean that we went down on our data path inputs, the data paths being those cards that allow you to get, in layman, what everybody, not layman, but what everybody recognizes like pixel perfect OSSE captures. We can do that without the hardware because we have those capture cards. It does mean that we bumped them down to 3. But if at any point we get another 2-input data path capture card, and even then, we have OSSEs available, we have RetroTinks available, we could just pipe it into an HDMI input. So if we were to do a 2, 3, 4 person retro game race, it would be no concern with the amount of inputs we have, because realistically we have 10, 11 inputs. 11 inputs to currently work with, which is huge. It allows to do many things. This year has been really simple in the front that because everything is plugged in, the matrix for the retro consoles is easily controllable via the web browser. It's very easy. You just, okay, I want console. I enable the console capture in OBS, and there it is. It's already set for me. There's no hot swapping involved like last year or anything like that. So it's very nice when things can go by swimmingly. And I've got the same phone, dude. Yes, the BlackBerry Key 1. It's very nice. So yeah, on the video front, we've upgraded cameras. The video quality as well. Last year there was some issues capturing Crash Bandicoots between runs, and that actually had to do with a quirk of the built-in vision software for the datapath cards. Upon resolution switching, it would glitch out and it could not go beyond a certain width. And why is that important? It's because back in the day, multiple consoles would have multiple resolutions. It could be anywhere from like a 256 by 240, 320 by 240, or a 512 by 240. and the Crash Bandicoot games actually run at 512 by 240. So if I can't set that, I can't get that pixel perfect capture that the data path cards. If it's not pixel perfect on those cards, it doesn't really look correct at all. But with an alternative software called VCS, which was free up until a while ago when the developer now charges for a compiled version, but it's free to compile on GitHub. And I will be hosting a mirror of that program on the R3 wiki, r3.fyi, sooner than later. I'm getting to it. It allows to force a resolution, so it's very easy for me to type in 512 by 240, dial in the rest of the colors and everything else, and now the Crash Bandicoot games that looked a little bit off last year now look perfectly fine. I was very surprised by how crisp it actually looked on the screens. So there was that. Um, and yeah, it just allows for a lot more. It also allows for something called oversampling, which is when you sample the width at a multiple. So let's say the width of a console that you're capturing is 256 by 240, but its horizontal size, the actual size of the video signal, so it fills the CRT, is a fraction. Well, on CRT, it really doesn't matter if it's a fraction. It's fine because CRTs don't deal with pixels or anything along those lines. But when you're dealing with the capture cards, you can't also dial it in on a 0.5, let's say, or anything like that. So on the OSSC, there's actually a brand new firmware that somebody was working on that allows you to do those fractional sampling horizontal sizes, size. But with oversampling, you can actually get to that integer size. So this actually comes back to the Crash Bandicoot run, where the PlayStation on 256 by 240, it's like whatever 0.25, which means that on 512, it means that the horizontal size is blah 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 0.5. Well, if I oversample that by 2, that means that now that 0.5 goes into another 0.5, which creates a 1. Now I have a whole number, very easy to pump into the configuration on the capture card. Nice clean pixels. Because when it's a fraction, eventually it's like a graph, right? If you create a graph, if it's out of phase, it's going to match at some point, but then later on it's going to drift more and more. So there's going to be columns of pixels that aren't perfectly sharp. And we're able to do that actually this year. So that was really nice. It's is for me, little details like that I always look into getting. I said it last year, but I'm going to say it again this year. When I notice something, I want to fix it. Even if nobody will notice it, I notice it, and therefore I want to fix it. So that's kind of like everything that I've been doing with the tech here. How's the hotel Wi-Fi? The hotel Wi-Fi is what it is. It mostly works. Sometimes it doesn't, because I mean, if there's too many people, they oversaturate an access point. You're really not going to get anything. The setup as well on setup day when the Google servers went down, half the web was down. That was really irritating because you didn't know if it was the Wi-Fi or Google. But on the bright side, our internet connection on the hardwire this year is actually very good. It's 100 megabits per second symmetrical, which is very nice. If we had the capability to stream in 1440p like I'm recording the VODs, then we would be able to certainly do that with our internet capabilities. Now, if Twitch can handle that, that's a bit of a different situation, because let me do some quick math here. So for the record, if you ever want to know what the optimal bit rate for your stream would be, there is a formula. That's the correct term, a formula, to figure out what it would be. So let's say we're doing a 720p stream right now here at NASA. So what would be the optimal bit rate before we reach a point of diminishing returns? If you don't remember math class, what is a point of diminishing returns? A point of diminishing returns is that the more you add on to it, it slopes up, but then at a certain point, it's going to plateau, and it's not really going to climb anymore. Or if it's going to climb, it's a lot harder. So there's a point that you reach where adding more things does not actually help at the same speed as before. So the easiest way that I like to describe bitrate is that imagine as if you were building a picture out of Lego blocks. The more Lego blocks you have, the quicker and more detailed your picture that of your size can be. If you don't have enough Lego blocks, or you're going to have to start cutting corners, and maybe colors will be missing, maybe finite detail won't be there because you ran out of little 1x1 pieces, and you got to start using like the 2x2 pieces, so it's more blockier. That's literally how bitrate works. That's why you'll notice sometimes when you watch TV or watch streams, if there's too much action or too much on the screen, everything turns into a blocky mess. That's called macro blocking. So the easiest way to know what that point of diminishing returns is, it's your width. So let's say we're doing a 720p stream. So that's 1280 times 720. Now you're going to want to also multiply by your frame rate. So at NASA we do 60, so we're going to do a 60. And then times a 0.1. What is 0.1 in this situation? Well, that's bits per pixel. So a 0.1 is kind of the highest you really want to go. Anything beyond that is way too much, and there's too much information. So a 0.1 is kind of like the highest you can go. High action. If for a slower action, maybe like a card game like Hearthstone or something like that, obviously 0.1 is not needed. But we're not looking for that. We're just looking for the highest point, the diminishing returns. That, and then we do a divide by 1,000. One more. I forgot a zero. Okay, so divide by 1,000. That gives us 5,529.6 kilobits a second, which is pretty accurate. That's if you look at our stream, it really hasn't been peaking above 5,500, even though I'm set OBS to 6,000 kilobits a second. With how strong our stream rig Artemis is, and on the medium preset, it really doesn't need that much more bitrate. And if you take a look at real-world examples such as MLB TV and NHL TV as well, since they use MLB's technology, their sports streams are 720p, 60 frames a second at 5,500 kilobits a second. Because anything beyond that, nobody will really notice. So that's the highest you can go. So actually, if we did a calculation, if I wanted to stream that at 1440p, let's just do that quick math here. Well, I forgot a number. Where did I forget a number? Whoop. Oh, that's why. So I would need 22,000 kilobits a second to be able to stream 1440p at the same quality as our 720p, so that way there's no macro block or anything. So obviously Twitch doesn't support that right now. Also, I see Julian's in the chat. Hey, Julian. Long time no see. Also, the Twitch chat, of course, disappeared on my phone. So I'm just going to quickly go over to the computer. You're going to disappear on the screen for a moment while I quickly see what chat I missed out. The lucky part about this is I have many long cords, and I'm able to do this quickly. What's the Wi-Fi password? You can figure that out when you show up. Okay. What was the formula? Let me actually type it out very quickly here while I'm at this keyboard. It is width times height times FPS times 0.1. Let's make that capital. And then divided by 1,000. Of course, it's not signed into Twitch on this computer. That's okay, whatever. And yes, I'm speedrunning a tech talk. Because that's what we do here. So, that's how you figure out the optimal bitrate of your stream if you ever have to. So that's why, if you ever notice, other marathons have been streaming at a 1080p, but they've also been streaming at 6,000 kilobits a second. And for me, it just doesn't make any sense to stream. If you take a look at the 720p stream, it looks better than a 1080p video on YouTube, which is why prior to last year's NASA, the YouTube VODs actually did not look as good as the Twitch VODs. And why was that? It's because YouTube recompresses all their video files to be around 3,000 kilobits a second, and our VODs were 6,000. So a lot of quality was missing there, and therefore the Twitch VODs look sharper. With the changes that I implemented last year, now our YouTube VODs are actually 1440p, which means when you flick that on, even on a 1080p monitor, YouTube does not compress the 1440p video files as much. So they look very nice. With this year, especially, everything's going to look super crisp, super sharp, and so that's it. Also gives a reason to go over to YouTube to watch a higher quality video stream. But would streaming at 144 hertz be realistic? Probably not in all things, in all honesty, because even though gamers like to get 144 hertz monitors, most other display devices don't go that high. So it's really a waste because they can only go at 60 frames a second. So you're better off just streaming at 60 frames a second. Um, where was I? Oh yeah. So other marathons decide to stream at 1080p, and they do it at a lower quality. Now there are streamers, mainly large partnered streamers, who they stream 1080p, but they stream at about 8 megabits a second. Now that's a little more acceptable, at least for me, because there is a bit of a quality bump. But realistically, I would have to go at about 10 megabits per second, maybe 9, and that's if you look at the Twitch inspector, its graph does go up to 10 megabits a second. It's just, is it realistically worth that? I'm not entirely sure. It's maybe something to look into. The other reason that we don't do at least a 1080p stream is because OBS doesn't support rescaling with a chosen scaling algorithm. What does that mean, and why is that important? So if our canvas is 1440p, if you divide that in half, it's very easy. Just get rid of every other pixel, and magically you have 720p, because 1440p is a double of 720p. There's 4 of 720s fit in one 1440. Beyond the point. Very easy. Cut it. Same image quality. That's what's literally happening right now. If we were doing a 1440p to 1080p, now there's actual scaling involved. It's not just a simple mathematical get rid of every other. And so the stream actually ends up looking very soft. And I saw that in my testing. The only way for it to not look very soft is to choose a different scaling algorithm. So if you're used to streaming in OBS, that would be like your bicubic, bilinear, Lanczos, point, area, those. By default, OBS uses bilinear, which means that it just averages 2 lines or multiples of lines to create a new one, which is why everything looks very soft. It's just an average. It's almost like a blur. So for me to be able to stream in a 1080p, that would mean my canvas would have to be double of 1080p, which means now we're getting to 4K resolution recordings, which is now so much more hard drive space. And I could record in the HEVC X265, but that's not really supported anywhere, and it's very CPU cumbersome. Now, graphics cards from the NVIDIA series can do that, but not to the exact degree that I want to currently. And it's in this case, it just makes a lot more sense to go do 1440 and 720. I mean, beyond a couple VODs from either an AGDQ or an SGDQ from years back, they have 1440p or something along those lines, but they're very specific ones. And I believe the only reason they're like that is because that was the year they were recording raw capture footage and the layout capture footage, and so they just upscaled the layout and then plastered the raw footage on top of it to create that higher quality one. They no longer do that because it takes a lot of time. I would know this personally as well because a lot of last year's NASA VODs got screwed up because of the fact that we had to do a double OBS thing because of resolution shenanigans and recording and everything like that. So we aren't doing that this year. It's just one OBS. The reason for that, sorry if I'm jumping around back and forth between topics a lot, but the reason that we went from 2 OBSs to 1 OBS this year is because they implemented the multi-track feature in custom recordings. So all the recordings can have multi-track audio, which, like I mentioned earlier, we have the main mix, the commentary mix, and the game audio only mix. So jumping back now to the fixing the VODs. I had to do that because there were VODs where I even personally screwed up. I was using the recording OBS to set up the next run, and that was recording, and it wasn't in studio mode. So I have a VOD where it's Ninja Pizza Girl, and all of a sudden it swaps over to Mario Golf in video, but it's Ninja Pizza Girl audio, and that can't happen. So I had to splice in the regular stream video or along those lines. So it is what it is. Um, but with this setup, everything's been very smooth. It's literally hit record, hit layout, go back to intermission, stop record. Everything's easy peasy. These VODs don't need any fixing up at all, even from an audio standpoint. So that's nice. So they will be up on YouTube sooner than later. Probably after the event, I'll be uploading a one-speed Kino VOD, one NASA 2019 VOD. Let's see here. Dark-Aries looks so familiar. Pretty sure I've met him IRL at some point, but I can't remember where. Yeah, I'm not sure because your name's not recognizable to me. Maybe face-wise. If you're in Canada, maybe that's why. If you saw me at a GDQ, that's also possible. I've been to a couple of GDQs. Real gamers have 240 hertz monitors. 144 is too slow. I'm not a real gamer. Mine only goes to 60, so you're the real gamer. You would clearly know better. I'm glad that you shared that insight. I have a 60 hertz monitor. I don't see the need to have more. So this is actually an interesting thing. I saw a video on Reddit that best described why people prefer a higher hertz monitor. When you take a monitor of 60 hertz and you take a monitor of 144 or even 200, whatever, and you slow them down, that's when you notice that because there's more frames, the animation is smoother, and it's kind of like the feeling of when you take like a sports stream and on your fancy newer TV, you turn on the motion interpolation where it takes it from whatever hertz to the 120 hertz your TV supports, whatever. Things just kind of give it that soap opera feel. But when you're watching sports or anything, that's useful. The things kind of stand out more. Everything's smoother. That's why people get a higher hertz monitor. It's because when they're playing those video games, that's so much, and it's not interpolated, but actual faster motion and more frames of animation. Everything becomes a lot smoother, and things are easier to point out because everything is just kind of more. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but that's why people prefer a higher hertz monitor, especially when they're doing professional gaming. It's just a lot easier to see how things are going. Real gamers have the feed connected directly to their brain like the Matrix. Yes, they do. Real gamers use CRT only. Yeah, with the rise of newer technologies like the RetroTink 2X and the OSSC, if you get one of those professional gaming monitors with like 1 millisecond, realistically, you're not going to notice the difference. When the added latency that it gives is less than a frame, you're really not going to notice anything. And the thing with lag testing on a CRT as well is that it literally takes 1 second for the whole thing to go. Like if you watch a CRT in slow motion, it goes line by line by line by line by line by line, and those lines stay there, and then they get replaced. So the top is definitely 0, but the bottom is like 1 frame. So as you look lower, there's the bottom is always going to have that 1 frame of latency, quote unquote, when you start measuring things. So, I mean, we're pretty much there where LCD monitors, they're at that bottom of the frame latency that CRTs have, except on a whole frame basis. So realistically, if you stick one of those in front of a person who needs frame perfect and has been on a CRT, that even if they require like a little time to adjust, they will probably adjust like within like a minute or two. And actually, ESA has been really pushing towards that. I know that Edenal's mentioned it multiple times that he just really hates CRTs. He hates lugging them around. He hates how much space they take up. And I mean, I can't blame them. I didn't normally I take a 27-inch, very nice JVC CRT to NASA. This year I only took my smaller Sony Trinitron. Why? Because it's really a pain to move it. It requires two people, absolutely. So for one monitor, it's a lot of effort, and I didn't feel that it was really necessary this year to bring that television. But if I had more sub low frame latency LCDs, I could just start investing in maybe a couple retro tinks, and people could just hook up their systems there and play quote unquote lag free. And I think that's really what marathons will be moving over to as CRTs continue to die. I mean, if you take a look at the markets, PVMs, which have been, and BVMs, which have been really sought after, are now really hard to grab because owning one of those has become really mainstream. It's like the TV you want to grab. And now that those are really hard and the people selling them know their value, now people are starting to move over more towards the JVC iArt series or D series or those the Sony Trinitrons or anything along those. They're going for the consumer prosumer style CRTs because they're the next best thing available. At some point, people are gonna once upscalers get good enough, they'll start using those with PC BGA monitors if they still exist. But at some point, the well's gonna run dry, and we're just all gonna have to move over to LCDs. So, great to great, yeah. That's with measuring the latency, because a lot of monitors lie about their latency. It's just it's not a gray to gray. I can't think of the proper way to explain it right now. So, but if you Google it in Wikipedia, I'm sure you'll figure out the specifics there that I can't describe at the moment. Wow, we're 35 minutes into an hour panel. Wow, but wow, my mind just blanked there for a moment. Yeah, there's been a lot of upgrades here, and honestly, this year is probably the first year I can say where I am extremely comfortable with the setup at NASA. There's oftentimes you'll see me or anybody else who's on tech, either those crazy guys or Lurk, really, will be maybe playing a game of Mafia or chilling at the back, where an Aspir and Laz are kind of chilling and also moderating. Shoutouts to the on-site moderation crew. But it's so solid. We can just move around this room and not really worry. There's no drop frames. The computer's not getting overloaded because it's a beast. Um, it's no funky connections with no signal drops. There's been a couple times where the color has dropped off a console, a retro console, and that's just because I need to grab all my RCA to BNCs and throw them in a bag and give them away to somebody and just order ones from DigiKey because you can buy cheap um, RCA to BNCs and they just get loose and they cause those connection issues. So really that's all that is. I just have it's kind of pricey. They end up being like $2 or $3 for one. So it's a lot cheaper for me to just find and even solder cables directly to BNC connectors. And I do have a bunch of them. You can get them from AliExpress, super nice ones. So that's something that we're moving forward to. This year, actually, to also mention, is the first year where we only have one console that's running off of RGB, and that is the Sega Dreamcast. I believe Naglaria has the two runs on it tomorrow, maybe tomorrow. But that's literally the only console that has RGB. Every other console is with direct component HD Retrovision cables for the Super Nintendo, the N64, the GameCube, because my GameCube is in a state of disrepair at the moment and it needs to be fixed up. I think something died on it because it just refuses to read discs. And when I swapped out the disk drive of another working GameCube, it also refuses to work. And we have a PAL GameCube with Game Boy interface that we'll be using for I believe there's a Game Boy Advance run later this week, so we'll be using that for a real hardware run with the HD Retrovision because that outputs RGB directly through the multi-out. The NES here, that will be for a Super Mario Bros. Z3 run, I believe. That on stream, If anybody follows my stream, I don't know why you would, but if you do, I do soldering streams every rare blue moon, pretty much at this point. Maybe sometimes I'll play a video game, but it's very, very, very rare. I installed the component output module for my NES, so that's a direct out. It has a Wii video socket on there, so Wii component cables into the back, into whatever, and you have a component 240p video feed. Works with great with American televisions, capture cards, and everything like that in our setup. So yeah, if shoutouts to HC Retrovision. If they ever make a Sega Dreamcast cable, I will probably be one of your first customers because it just makes life a lot easier when I don't have to deal with more and more adapters or anything like that. Um, yeah, and I think that's actually the trend as well with people getting into these high fidelity video game setups is they're realizing that the way that people used to recommend things with using SCART is very cumbersome if you're in North America. It essentially makes no sense when here we have the same video signals, but we used BNC and VGA connectors, and also component video exists, and it can be of the exact same quality as an RGB signal. It's literally mathematically transcribed in a matrix, transposed. So mathematically, you literally convert it from RGB to YPBPR luminosity minus red or minus blue minus red, and then with the three you create green with the signal. So there's no quality loss. There can be if you get into chroma subsampling, but there generally isn't. So yeah, the setup this year has been a lot simpler in comparison to last year's, and it's been very solid. Um, Even with everything, we generally end up ahead of schedule, which is super nice. And the setup blocks that we have on a per night basis so far have basically get filled up with whatever random runs people want to do. Which is also nice because one of the things that a lot of people continue to talk about is, oh, I missed the bonus streams of X and X Marathon. I'd really like for that to come back. Well, when an event grows to a certain size, you really can't have bonus streams. Last year we didn't have one because of scheduling time. This year we really don't need one because every night we get random games that people can put on a stream. So it kind of replaces that. If we have time, obviously, for some bonus, maybe we'll do one. But otherwise, that's just how it is. Um, do I speedrun Tetris or anything? I do every now and then. NES Tetris, Magical Tetris Challenge. I've recently been playing Tetris 99. Crystal Crisis came out, which is Nicholas's version of Puzzle Fighter. I've been playing that because there's a colorblind mode. If you want to watch me be very awful, there was the Yoshi's Cookie Tournament, which I forgot is very awful for colorblind people, but it was a fun time. If you check out the NASA Twitter, you can see the winner got a Panuki. Don't look at the Twitter if you don't want to know who won. Am I at this event? No, I'm not speedrunning anything at this event. I'm solely focusing on the uh, back end, as you will, of this event. At this point, I believe my role is a technical director, so my job is to make sure that things go technically smoothly. Basically, for the past year, I've been theory crafting and planning. How do I make this event run smoothly? What obstacles am I going to run into? How do I get past those obstacles? If that solution doesn't work, do I have another solution that can deal with that issue? And that's probably one of the strengths of this event, honestly, is the fact that the setup started with trying to be as robust but stable as possible, while still aiming for that 100% video quality. Um, there are other solutions that involve more automation, maybe more stability, maybe less stability in comparison, depending on who you talk to. And that's also perfectly fine. There's obviously different ways to skin a cat. I like the way that pretty much I've planned things out here, and I think it works really well. Will this setup scale as the event grows? That's to be determined, but I think that with more time, it will. especially now that the way that we're doing things with a direct capture and not needing OSSCs and anything like that is becoming more and more mainstream. People like Bob from Retro RGB have been doing videos on direct capture, and there's devices that are being built specifically for that, such as the SCART to DVI and the component to DVI, to allow for easy access to do that. So I just really dislike needing to chain equipment into other equipment to make things work. For like, and people chain the OSSC, and then they need to get a capture card for that anyways. But then they're playing on a CRT, which means that the OSSC could have literally been useless if you're buying a data path to capture the OSSC. It's just a waste of money. Something which I don't have infinite amounts of. Um, since this whole event is run off of our personal pockets. There is no budget. Um, Most of the equipment I own myself. If not, we rent like the compressor, the headphone distribution amplifiers. They're absurdly cheap for what they are. You go to Long and McQuaid, you can rent that compressor for $8 for the week, or the headphone distribution amplifier for $8 for the week. There's obviously also mixers and everything else you can rent. It can be very affordable. There's other pieces of equipment that I'm borrowing, um, but from other people. But yeah, so, and I really dislike borrowing equipment as well. That's why I try to buy my own equipment. At this point, I can probably run an event like this by myself off of my own equipment, maybe at a smaller scale. If I were to do like a Smash tournament, let's say, or not obviously a super large one, but let's say like um, just like a video game store is doing a Smash tournament and wants it streamed or something, I could do that to a high quality, like a projector and a camera and like the multiple game feeds and everything like that, like commentators with the broadcast headsets and everything. I could do something on one of those small scales. Or if I were to do a like a weekend marathon with a much smaller audience, the local, let's say, only people from like Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, New York, like closer people, right? Like local events, something akin to UKSG or BSG or something along those lines. Um, I could do that on my own, no problem. I just literally need a venue. Um, So yeah, or at a convention where the venue is already set and the people going to that convention are only going to be the ones local to it. That I could literally do that all on my own at this point with the equipment that I own. So um, yeah, if anybody ever wants to do an event, by the way, locally, um, I can travel to Quebec or Manitoba. The States is a little bit harder. This gets into the whole reason of why NASA isn't in the States currently, and it just has to do with the fact that traversing with so much equipment over the border is just asking for troubles. Now, if a lot of the equipment was already there, like let's say there was a music store there where I could rent audio equipment from, projectors from, let's say, the capture equipment pretty much we've been working on a more portable setup. It's not completely done yet. It requires maybe a couple more retro tinks and maybe some more OSSCs, just so everything can fit neatly in. Obviously, can't travel with CRTs or monitors or anything, but if LCD monitors are already there, like traveling with my computer is easy. Traveling with maybe a couple microphones, easy. It's just how small and portable can the setup be. I obviously can't bringing big things like um, the Matrix and other pieces of hardware obviously cuts into the space that you have and obviously makes your equipment size larger and everything. And you kind of want to go compact. Don't want to need to drive everywhere and all those things. CRT smuggling is a big problem. Homeland is cracking down on. Smash players are the most oppressed minority. Yeah, Smash players could also just start getting into retro tinks and OSSCs and playing on LCDs. There's nothing stopping them. I mean, there was actually a thing where Hungrybox was working with Eon, who makes the GameCube HD dongle thingamabobs, and he ran a whole tournament off of that, and everyone was fine with that. They're low latency. Their video is not up to quality with an official component cable, but that clearly doesn't stop people because they can't see the difference. I can see the difference. Um, if you take a look at My Life in Gaming's or Digital Foundry's videos comparing them, to me at least, you can very see that there's a clear shift in colors, and the video is not it's not directly comparable to an official component cable, as as nice as those devices are. They look super awesome. On Twitch, they're gonna get compressed anyways, so it really doesn't matter. But for people going like, "Oh, they're just as good," it's almost there. There's some firmware tweaks that have to happen, um, and they're almost there, but they're not there yet. But they will be. And it's actually also starting a trend for other devices as well. There's now the DC HDMI. There's work on PS2 HDMI. There's the CPS2, the arcade hardware HDMI. Um, the only problem that I have with HDMI devices like that is when they can't do a direct resolution output. Nice thing about the GameCube one is that it can do the analog output of like a 240p, or the HDMI can be like a direct 480p, so it would be the same between the two. But when you get into like, oh, it only does when you take like the NES HDMI modification, it changes the frame rate first off, so you can't really use it for speedrunning, and it can't do like a 240p output or anything. So it can only do 1080p out at most. It's now already out of date because now we have two 160p monitors, what most people call 4K. So it's already out of date. But if it could do a native resolution and then you could scale that, well, that would work a lot easier, right? So why are we subjected to this LCD apologist? Says the one who brings CRTs so the runners can run on CRTs and owns like a basement full of them. All right, next question. Um, yes, My Life in Gaming plug. They're cool people. They do good videos. 50 minutes. 10 more minutes. What do I talk about? Wow, I'm literally getting cut off on my own panel.